The sculpture I did for Lightsview, the title for it is Landings. One of the influences was from native grass forms, which I've really loved and looked at quite a bit the last, say, decade or so. It's got quite a light sort of landing sort of feel to it. So this is May 2011. The sculptural installation work, you can call it, Landings is installed. Started to look at this initially back in about September last year. This was a commission through Art and Public Places in South Australia. So there was a lengthy committee process to go through for it. This resulted in an outcome which was great. As with other commissions, this really began when I came out, looked at the site, investigated the site, went through a process of doing, as per usual with me, a lot of little drawings were done, worked those drawings up into a proper model and maquette. And then in this case, the fabrication of this was done with DeMille Engineering, who I've worked with for about a quarter of a century now. I provided exactly one-to-one templates to scale, cut out of board, very thin board. And then those templates go down to the factory, and so they work off the one-to-one templates. This is important because they have to work exactly to those to get my sense of drawing and line in them. And that's why these one-to-one templates are provided. And the fabricating, which is a lot of hard work, and the guys down there do a great job on it. Daryl mainly worked on this, has done a fantastic job on the fabricating. On the day we're placing these, I came out with DeMille Engineering. People who were doing the installation together with me, with a truck and crane and such. And the placement's really important. Basically put one piece in, and I looked at it, sort of lined it up, and then I look at the second piece, and what I've tried to do is to get the works to sort of dance, be quite light, quite lyrical, so they move and they sort of shift around a bit like some native grasses would. And then at the same time, one work sort of visually refers to the next one and the other one to that. This connects the whole works together, and even though people may not be totally aware when they see it, their eyes will tend to jump from one work to the next one, and it gives the whole form, the whole installation work a bit of a reading as one piece. As you move around the pieces, they break sometimes into little groups of 3s and 4s, and sometimes you see them in larger groups. So the work actually looks quite different visually from different angles. It sort of forms an archway and sort of frames the city. When you see it from one end, it sort of forms almost like a rib cage, like the rib cage of a whale, but then it breaks into little groups from different angles. Early on with the work, I was looking at the notion of promenade, which was out at Lightsview. This was part of the brief, and really what I tried to do with it was have a sense of promenade, almost like a promenade that comes out of Europe, but at the same time I've used these forms from native grasses. So a promenade in Europe would be quite hefty with large statues. The promenade out at Lightsview has a lighter, I think more open Australian feel to it, with these grass forms just touching the ground. They then turn into, at the bottom there's sort of a figurative reference contained within them as well. They capture the sky above with the stainless steel I use in it. Then as I move along I actually use the stainless steel down the bottom, and that reflects the ground as well. It's meant to have quite an Australian promenade feel to it.
Talking about it being a promenade, and the pieces are kind of promenading down the strand as well. What I like about them too is that they're actually placed so that they're within a very formal context, and they're quite formal, but they actually relate to each other as well. Yeah. You know, you've placed them so that you lead the eye from one to the other.
Yeah. But it's not a totally regular connection. There's a little bit of almost organic playing around with the way they connect together. and then hope in the end that, it's quite a sort of lyrical, little dancing, little, song type feel to the whole work.
You can see them as a whole, but they're also individuals and that they relate to each other. These kind of echo grass forms, but to me they also echo the trees that are here. The Australian vegetation form and the European vegetation form are two very different things, and so they contrast really well in this environment. I think it really highlights both of them, and they're both a part of our landscape. I like the way that, you've used the stainless steel and the Corten. It's this progression from the top to the bottom, as it were. There's a different relationship of the elements in each one that you actually see as you move along.
The Corten and the stainless, I think they actually work quite well together, and I've used them a couple of times before, like in a large sculpture at Marion. And as with a sort of a theme running through my work, the sort of notion of connecting the old and the new together, I quite like them as materials reflecting that. And then you get some nice little formal things. The stainless up the top sort of picks up the sky and the clouds. When the light's here, they sort of twitter a little bit and move with the light.
And when you talk about the light, it's like the stainless will shine in bright sunlight, and at certain times of the day it may be that just the tops and the bottoms are really visible, and that's a kind of a really exciting visual thing for me as well.
In different situations, winter to summer and things like that, and the piece will appear to be different.
The materials work really well together, because to me it makes you think about the really earthy, gritty side to things and the shiny, new side to things. In this context of a new housing estate, it kind of works really well, I reckon.
Lightsview is a joint venture with the government of South Australia. Eventually it'll be home to about 2,500 dwellings and a population in excess of 6,000 people. We're on Cityview Boulevard at the moment at Lightsview. Behind us is Civic Park, and that's the site that we chose for the public art that we see here that Greg Johns has done. The actual site that we've chosen is still very much under construction. We've got some retirement housing, 3-storey multi-dwelling stuff going on this side, and then some other developments, apartments going on that side. Eventually, Civic Park behind us, where the art is centred, will actually be one of the main community meeting hubs for the project, with a lot of high density surrounding it. That's the reason for actually selecting this site for the art, to really join in with the Civic Park. And it's set to become a really, really strong meeting place for the overall community. This particular art is the first of many pieces that we intend to roll out throughout the project. We feel that having public art within a public space is a really important component to building the community and the sense of community in the project. So there'll be several more pieces as the project proceeds.
One of the important roles that public sculpture has is that it does have a thoughtful aspect, and that people perhaps discover stuff over many visits. I want the piece to work in relation to the buildings that are here and in relation to the park, and I prefer to work in open spaces like this rather than really tight urban situations. So you really try to resolve it on both a formal level and a conceptual level, and try to pull the two together, so that in the long run it becomes an interesting work for the community that lives here. It connects to site, but it becomes interesting that people can come back and draw different aspects out of the work over a long period of time, hopefully even over a number of years, to discover other little elements about it. It's not an obvious literal design work.
That's always the challenge, I think, to make something that connects to the place that you're putting it into, but is also makes people think beyond the actual look of it. What is the spirit behind it? What does it actually mean? I think this kind of provokes all kinds of thoughts, which is great.
Yeah.
It's not just a piece of art that is put, or design that is put into a place and that it says what it is. It kind of talks about a whole lot of other things as well. The little wriggly bits on the top, the curves on the top of the forms, echoes the curves of the hills that are in the background. Someone may walk past this for a year and then suddenly go, oh, look at that.
Yep.
You know, that
Yep.
looks like that.
Yeah.
And that is really, I think that's a really great thing about putting sculpture in a landscape, is that people look at it continuously and see more and more.
There's this notion of these very slender Australian grass forms, but also this sort of notion of these sort of slender figures sort of coming out of the sky and sort of diving back towards the ground. And for me, it's got that sort of sense of a bit of almost returning spirit to place, and a little bit of notion of, you know, and hopefully a bit with this housing estate, which has got some reasonable sustainable notions going around. It's about having respect really back again for land and place, and trying to bring that as part of the piece without sort of lecturing about it, but just getting that message across in a subtle but hopefully fairly strong way.
You were talking about them being spirit-like forms coming in, and landing on the ground, but to me they also seem very grounded, and they're coming out of the ground as well. I mean, you can read them as either.
Yeah.
And I think that the elements of the stainless on the top and the bottom actually make that more ambiguous. One of the things I like is the placement of this and the placement of the promenade is that it does highlight the long views to the city and to the hills. It does give space to reflect on those kinds of things. And whilst this is a very European environment, the trees and the grass, you've brought in an Australian element that actually isn't here to such an extent. So it's just making people think about another element.
Lightsview's had a pretty strong environmental agenda with it, with the housing, and I've tried to a little bit sort of tap into this notion again of sort of caring for place, looking after place. The grasses have a figure of reference to them. Down the bottom, sort of a head shape is created. For me, it gives them the sense of these sort of diving figures sort of returning to the landscape, almost as bring back a sense of spirit of sort of returning to the landscape. And inside my own head, this is a bit about having notions of, including in notions even from Aboriginal culture, of we do a housing state, but we start to look at looking after the place and making it sustainable, and we return the spirit to the place by really respecting the place.